All right, y'all, we are live for another Stars and Stars weekly live. I'm your host, Isa Nakazawa, and yeah, we're on YouTube every Wednesday now. And it's been a lovely new addition to the show where we get to use this time together to connect, to answer some audience questions, and to dive into the weekly astrology. And there is so much going on in the cosmos this week. So I have most of the time prepared will be spent on just the weekly astrology because I didn't receive that many questions. But again, because it's a live chat, if there are questions, this is the space to ask them. And it's also a space of sharing. I really would like to create a culture of sharing where I also learn from you all. And astrology is something that is really strengthened through observation and anecdote. So, qualitative research is important. And I'm going to be sharing a couple of stories and anecdotes from my loved ones about how the astrology has been expressing itself for different rising signs to ground some of the weekly astrology for us and examples because I think it's helpful. And I would love and invite all of you to chime in and let me know how some of this astrology is landing for you. And if you could, hi, yes, my sister's here. So if you could introduce yourself in the chat, and then maybe when we do share how some of this astrology is sitting, it could be helpful if we also say and share a rising sign so that we can have an understanding of where all of this deliciousness it's not just delicious. I say that word a lot, but that's my seventh house trying to make everything sound really poetic. But yeah, there's a lot of, I would say, dynamics to this week's astrology. And the main plot, a lot of the plots keep falling on the actual day that I'm doing these lives, which I love. So tonight is the full Cancer rising. Yes, Natty's so good. So tonight, and I'm wearing my little Scorpio pendant today because today at 10:47 p.m. PST is the Scorpio new moon. And a lot of the reasons why people have been saying this new moon falls on the 20th is because a lot of the world is not on Pacific Standard Time. So it's happening tonight and tomorrow. And there's so many it's so funny, my educator hat's on, and I'm like, wanna be surrounded with all of us being like, "Now what do we think a new moon is?" Um, Now there's a lot of interesting things around this new moon. One is typically new moons are the phases where we do seed intentions, right? And I love working with the lunar phases because of this, because there is like a beautiful cycle that we can follow. And new moons are typically where we set intentions and then we check in throughout the kind of gradual lunar phases until it culminates in the full moon. And I think it's nature's timekeeper and it's really, really gorgeous. And my sister is a Cancer rising. So I often think about her as, being the moon being her timekeeper. What's different though today about this new moon is that there's a lot going on. So we have multiple planets in Scorpio right now. We have Mercury, the planet of communication. We have Venus, the planet of connection. We have the sun, our vital energy source, our battery. And we have the moon, our receptive, emotional um, light, the two luminaries. So we have quite a bit of action in the sign of Scorpio. Um, but Mercury in particular, which just moved into Scorpio on Tuesday, it was in Sagittarius and now it's in Scorpio, is directly opposing that planet that we keep talking about on this channel, Uranus, and which is now in Taurus at the anaretic degree of 29. So we have this opposition that's making this particular new moon really distinct. And what I want you to think about is how this new moon is not a typical new moon where we would seed intentions because of that tricky opposition between Mercury and a lot of the planets and Uranus and Taurus. There's something about breakthroughs. There's something about disruptions and unexpected communications and information that's coming a lot of the times from inside the house, because I want us to remember that Mercury is still retrograde and retrogrades are a moment for internal reflection and review. I also want to ground and remind us that multiple planets are in retrograde. We have Jupiter and Cancer in retrograde. We have Saturn and Neptune and Pisces in retrograde. We have Uranus in retrograde. So there's a cluster of energies that are asking us and inviting us into a process of review and re-examination. And there's also why I'm probably of astrology. I have a Scorpio asks, what could I expect to receive, feel, experience? Yes, we will definitely get into. I love these questions. Pro delicious. I love that. And hi, LaShawn. It makes me so happy knowing you're here. Um, so yeah, I want us to think about reviewing, reimagining, recasting. And I also want us to think about, Mercury as the planet. And I was just writing down some notes about thinking about how this new moon is asking us to reckon with the past. And I was thinking about, and I talk about this really often in my show and kind of everywhere I speak, where I talk about some of the harms of storytelling because we're in this era where we all love storytelling and storytelling is really uplifted. And I think stories can liberate us and set us free, but they can also limit us. And so with Mercury in retrograde in Scorpio, I think it's a really good time to think about the editing process and some of the edits we might want to make or that we're being invited or nudged towards. So, is there a new role that we want to write ourselves into? Are there new openings that we need to add into our sentences to create room for possibility? Is there a kind of set of assumptions that we've been living under that are reproducing, the same kind of cycles of behavior? And I think Scorpio, as a Scorpio stellium myself, I can speak to Scorpio's nature of hypervigilance. Sometimes Scorpio, as a way to self protect, it really tries to create control through this probing, investigative nature. And that intensity and fixation can be obviously really incredible in the proper context. But sometimes Scorpio can really overly try to know. And I think this Scorpio new moon is really inviting Uranus as a key player, which to me is honoring mystery, honoring the unexpected, honoring the fact that we can't know and that that's good news. And so Uranus to me, I've talked about this, is a mischievous trickster. And I really think we should invite, because also Mercury is a trickster. And so I think that this kind of trickster energy is really, really it's medicinal, especially to Scorpio, who sometimes needs to be soothed by remembering that this actually is the sign that can embrace mystery, that understands there's something so powerful and magnetic about what we don't know, and about embracing that. And so I think Scorpios, because I believe I was asked what we can expect to experience. Now, I am curious if you're a Scorpio rising or a Scorpio sun, because a lot of the horoscopic astrology is predicted through your rising. So if you do know your rising, let me know that as well. But I really think, and I've actually prepared a couple of ways to frame this because there's a lot of information about Scorpio new moon, and so I want to contribute something unique because I there's so many great astrologers and resources out there. So if I had to create my own mantra for this new moon, it would be the act of letting go will liberate you. And the liberation aspect of that mantra is Uranus. So we're inviting that disruption as an invitation to let go of the places we feel we need to control. And we're moving out of this lower vibration Scorpio need to survive. And we're moving towards this invitation to thrive. Is there something that we can put on our shrines that will help us channel that curiosity? Ooh, I love that. I think like mercurial objects could be cool. And also, I do love Taurian because Uranus is in Taurus. I love like flowers. And I love, and actually, Nati, that brings me to one of the first quotes I'm going to invite into this kind of like ritual of the Scorpio new moon is from one of my favorite Nigerian philosophers, Bayo Komolafe. And one of his frames around grief as generative is comes through a metaphor of flowers and as pollinators. And so I do think flowers can be almost like a salve to the Scorpio, kind of scarcity mindset. So I think creating an altar that's almost Venusian, that's almost Taurian, it's like offering soothing to the Scorpio in all of us. Whether we have Scorpio or not, we have that part and we have the whole zodiac inside of us. So there is a part of us that is self-protective, and that is afraid to let go and that wants to control to keep itself safe. And so maybe we can offer that part of ourselves a flower, or something comforting, you know. So whatever that is to you, I think would be beautiful. So I want us to think about how grief and letting go is actually an opening for possibility. And bio talks a lot about this, about grief as generative. And so I wanted to share a couple quotes that I think really speak to the potential of this new moon. So he says, but doesn't loss have a hidden life, a secret fermenting in its body like a fungal parasitoid in the chest of an insect? At what point does grieving become the choreography of a strange joy? Maybe loss is also infected, infected with becoming. Maybe we need to think of loss in more fruitful ways. And he also invokes Weller's axiom about loss. Everything we love, we will lose. And he views that less as a static declaration and more as a dynamic invitation, a longing to meet grief head on because grief is generative. She opens up things that were once bound up and secure, exposes them to the elements, and therefore facilitates change. And I thought this is such a beautiful frame for tonight's new moon, where Uranus is asking us to trust in what we will lose when we invite in a new process. Remember, Scorpio is the sign of transformation, and it's also associated in the tarot with the card, the death. And the death card is often feared as a tarot reader. Whenever I pull the death card for a client, it really invokes, like, an immediate reaction in their body, and it is one of fear. It is one of a preemptive sense of loss, and so if they have a question in their heart and they see that I've pulled the death card, there's an immediate association with, "I'm going to lose this thing that I love," and we can all agree that that is a very understandable reaction and response, and it's not ever to pretty up death or to pretty up loss. Now, of course, in the tarot, another really powerful symbolic language, this card is not about literal death. And I think that's an important place to start. And one of the mantras of the death card is say yes to death, say yes to life. And so I want us to think about that connection that bio is already putting or creating in our hearts and our minds between death and life and the cycle of rebirth, which is Scorpio. And so I wanted to read from one of the canonical books, The Mirror of the Soul Tarot, because I really liked some of the description around the death card. And the death card has a lot of different imagery in depending on the deck. But for right now, because I'm still not as advanced with my YouTube skills to pull up images, I just wanted to read some passages. Okay. Death shows two faces, one destroying and tearing down, the other freeing you from old bonds which have become confining, preventing life. Which of these aspects will predominate depends on your attitude. Any desire to hold on or cling to old bonds will cause their death to appear that much more agonizing. Hesse tells us to let ourselves fall. And this repeatedly is something I return to over and over again because I, again, as a Scorpio stellium, often find myself unconsciously creating more pain by assuming that I know the best outcome and by living in a state of complete attachment. And so I really resonate with this idea that when we cling, things in our life can appear and feel more agonizing. And so again, to tie it back to this new moon in Scorpio, with so many planets in Scorpio, where in your life do you feel that clinging? Where in your life do you feel you unconsciously create more pain by resisting the natural process of things? And to ground that tangibly, it could be like allowing someone to show you and reveal their intention instead of probing or instead of feeling like you always have to lead. I think again, we can go through I actually maybe this would be a good time for me to share some anecdotes of how I've been observing these energies play out for my loved ones. So, if there's any, sorry, I always use Leo rising as an example, but I have so many in my life. But one of my best friends is a Leo rising, and this full moon is falling on her fourth and 10th axis. Scorpio is in her fourth, and the fourth house again is this really private place of our family, our ancestry, our roots, our sense of home. But when you think of the fourth, I really want you to think of also like the house of belonging. It's where and the early messages of how and to whom we belong. And the 10th is it tethers us to the world stage. It's our public roles, our reputation, our offerings to the world. And last night, I got to witness her interview her father, who is also an alumnus of the school, the Pacific School of Religion, where she's currently a professor. And so it was this beautiful fourth house moment where she was in conversation with her father at the university she's now a professor at, where her parents met. And she was in conversation with him around this book that he just wrote about how do we dismantle racism within the church. And I am not myself like a practicing Christian, but I am her close friend and someone who's very interested in decolonizing spiritual and religious traditions. And it was really amazing because it was this very 10th housey moment where she was seated in front of her, in front of her colleagues and taking up space and using her power and her gifts of facilitation. She's a Gemini. Her father's also a Gemini, and they were weaving this story in their family, and it's kind of this cycle of this series of echoes of remembrance of her parents, coming back and returning to this place where they first met, and inviting in new work, new theory, new practice, and through the lens and facilitation of his daughter. And so I thought, wow, this is a really powerful example of the Scorpio and Taurus new moon in action, where you see that this opposition to Uranus is nothing to fear. And in this example, it's very literal because Mercury rules communication. And this was a talk. So it was like a daughter and her father giving language to this ancestral inheritance of really thinking about how do we practice a radical theology, a radical Christianity that overturns the values of empire and liberates Christianity from these roots that have, in a lot of ways, participated in some of the most unconscionable evils. I say that like so lightly. And so I thought that was just like a really moving example of seeing how by creating the space for her to be in conversation with her father, all of us who attended actually received this blessing of their kind of collaborative brilliance. And so that was a really helpful example for me to see, like, wow, astrology, man, it's symbolic and it's very literal. For my Taurus risings, all of the fixed rising signs, all of the astrology this week hits our angular houses. So we're really feeling it. And again, I want to remind you that the astrology can also fall internally. Mercury's retrograde right now. I think there's a lot of astrologers that are promising like shocking revelations. And, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of Taurus and Scorpio and Leo and Aquarius risings. And not everyone is going to like receive, a spicy text from their ex lover, though that certainly could happen. But I think for me as a Taurus rising, I've really been intentionally working with the astrology by bringing awareness to how I show up in relationship. And I can share that one of the things that's been coming up for me as an example is because I am a Scorpio stellium and a Taurus rising, I have a cluster of planets that fall in my seventh. And so I approach seventh house things like my committed partnerships, my collaborations, my romantic relationships with a scorpionic, probing, and investigative lens. And I'm really working on centering my own experience in my relationships because I often center the other person's experience of me. And I think that there's a lot of ways in which that skews towards unconsciously losing myself and losing my own vision and my own kind of sense of myself. And what it is that I'm looking for in relationships because I'm so fixated. Again, remember, Scorpio is fixed water. So it is obsessive, it's intense. And as a Scorpio, I've worked really hard on how to de-shame my intensity and how to distribute it. Esther Perel has helped me a lot in terms of thinking about how, in most contexts throughout time, we have had a village of relationships that create a full, meaningful life. And so, how do we create distributed sources for our intensity rather than repress it? Scorpio can become quite a distorted person when it represses its intensity. And I think a good place for Scorpios to place their intensity is spiritual practice, is meditation, is the places in or like, capitalist American society that are really hard to carve out because Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces are not hardwired for productivity. They are beings that require a level of emotional intensity. And so finding those spaces for emotional intensity that don't become quickly troubling are not easy. That's why I think Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces are the signs that deal heavily with addiction because and escapism, because these three signs really don't know often how to satisfy their drives in a society that is really just about repressing the emotional. And there's a lot of what we call in astrology grand trines between Jupiter and Cancer, all of these planets in Scorpio, and Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. So a lot of planets are actually revealing all of our need as a humanity right now to honor the emotional. And so that's being really kicked up and it's really loud. And I'm sure we all, can see the trend in American life towards, really repressing, taming, and trying to control the emotional and all of the consequences of that, right? Like when we're trying to approach everything really just, and we talked about this kind of on every live, how we're starting to overly pedestal one way or one style of thinking, which is like the rational or the scientific, and we aren't bringing balance. And so that creates a lot of distorted shame. Like Drake is a Scorpio. A lot of the famous Scorpio men, I think, are great examples of distorted Scorpio energy where you feel so much shame of your own vulnerability that you do really strange things to prove that you're not vulnerable. And that is the exact opposite example of what we want to bring in this week. Yes, Nati art, especially for my Pisces Cancer. Art is such a great place for that. Um, yeah, and so I want us to think about the generativity of loss. And I've been thinking a lot about moments, and maybe this is a prompt for you all, is thinking about moments where you've let go of something you were attached to or that you had a great hope for, and that loss doesn't always beget more loss, that loss can actually create a clearing for something again that we don't know and we can't anticipate. I remember being in my 20s and having friends that would only break up with someone if they had something else lined up. And I've never been like that. Like, I think really closing something out and clearing something out and then allowing yourself to go through the grief process without a sense of what's ahead is really courageous. And it's honoring the natural process of what we're all experiencing in the Northern Hemisphere as we move deeper and deeper into winter. And we see all around us the leaves, falling and it gets colder and we're drawn inward and honoring that this process is being mirrored and reflected back in nature. And it's a totally nothing to fear. So I'm curious if if other folks have been experiencing anything this week. I can also backtrack and just say Monday and Tuesday we had the sun sextile Saturn, so really stabilizing energy on Monday. Then Tuesday, Mercury ingressed, moved into Scorpio from Sag, still, retrograde. So wherever Scorpio falls in your chart, that is a place of deep review. Today we have this new moon in Scorpio. Mercury is trining Neptune. So it is creating kind of this access to our dreams and our empathy and this place of compassion, which I think we can really use as balm if there's any unexpected things that have been coming up that are making you feel really raw or really on edge. And then tomorrow we have what's known as a Mercury cazimi, when the sun and Mercury are conjunct, or they come together, and Mercury comes in the heart of the sun. The word cazimi comes from the Arabic term "in the heart of the sun." And this is going to be interesting because it is a Mercury retrograde. And so astronomers call this an inferior conjunction, though that doesn't necessarily translate astrologically. And no matter if it's direct or retrograde, Cazimis offer these opportunities again to share messages and also to bring a sense of clarity. I think that the retrograde aspect of it is, again, thinking about the cyclical nature of these messages and the way that messages from the past can be, or the way that certain messages come through to nudge us towards reckoning and facing things from the past that consciously or unconsciously we just haven't dealt with. And we know that all the things that we don't deal with come for us. And rather than be dragged, we can choose to consciously invite reflection. And it's your choice. Like I've had a series of people, because I recently had a birthday, and birthdays are always opportunities for people to reach out and communicate. I've had, a number of messages that I don't necessarily know, how deeply I want to open certain conversations. And that's each of our choice to figure out what we want to give, to each conversation. But I think it's more symbolic, at a symbolic level. Like, what are those themes of the messages that are either you're receiving in a literal sense or that are coming up for you that you want to sift through and parse through and reflect on? Um, then as a Scorpio, how can we de-shame emotional intensity without singeing our persona? How can we de-shame emotional intensity? Ooh, I wanna hear more about that. Um, yeah, because I think for me, the de-shaming my emotional intensity has looked like the opposite of singeing my persona, because I think our sense of self, um yeah. I think for me, I think what's personal about it is like how each one of us shames our intensity. Like I think, but I do think this is a bit universal for Scorpios, is that, but I can only speak for myself and you can tell me if it resonates, is I've moved through the world with a lot of fear and kind of repression of how much I desire, because the kind of mantra for Scorpio is I desire. And there's been a real fear throughout my life that I won't get what I desire, or that my desires are somehow not trustworthy. And so, one of the ways that I've de-shamed that is by building more self trust in what I desire. And then also, this sounds really literal, but studying desire. So, there's like a lot of incredible, texts on desire that have really helped me parse through, like from Lauren Berlant to Esther Perel, to people who really like have built research and language around the erotic and helping, because the reason I'm saying this is because desire is constructed. And so some of the things that I desired, like I remember in my early 20s, I started noticing like I would only like hook up with dudes that were like hyper conventionally attractive. And so I was like, what's up with that? And obviously, I tied that back to not feeling that way growing up. And so wanting to hook up with people that I could be like, if they want to hook up with me, then it's confirmation that I am now desirable. And so there was like a lot to look at there, to not just accept, but to like interrogate and question and be like, oh, you're outsourcing a sense of intensity to someone else because there's something about yourself that you still haven't examined and integrated. So I think it's not just about, I think it's important for Scorpios to probe underneath the motivation, because in the modern system, one of our co-rulers, Pluto, rules the unconscious. So when Scorpios don't check in and excavate their motivations at a subterranean level, they're not necessarily going to be that honest with themselves about like what is underneath these desire drives, because everything about Scorpio is our desire. So you have to kind of do the work to investigate why you desire what you desire, and you have to consciously choose which desires you want to, garden and which ones you kind of want to compost, which is, our work forever and ever and ever. My desires are often localized to completing the next thing I need to do. I wonder if you have Aries like me. Because, yeah, Scorpio, because in the traditional system, Scorpio and Aries are ruled by Mars. Mars is all about doing. And so it bypasses a lot of the other softening mechanisms of feeling in order to get what it wants. And so I actually wrote down a lot for the Scorpio new moon that I actually think sometimes Scorpio needs to understand itself outside of the framework or the function of doing and acting. And this is where maybe I'm completely understanding your question, because I think that can feel really disorienting for Scorpios when they're moving into a phase of allowing and surrender, because we know ourselves precisely through this function of doing, of going out there and creating our life. But I think it's actually a really helpful disorientation. And hopefully that you understood what I was saying about this opposition to this, planet Uranus is really critical to answer your question, because Uranus is here to create a disruption for Scorpio. And Uranus is right now in a fixed earth sign. And it's the sign of the sensualist. It's the sign of, the queen who, waits in her garden patiently. And she's not like Scorpio. She knows that change is a natural part of everything. So she doesn't always need to rush towards change, because she understands that she can allow change to happen. Like the flower will bloom and it will die without her willfulness. So part of what Uranus is trying to mirror back to Scorpio is this kind of like compulsion Scorpio has to to be the driver of the change. It's very Martian, like Aries, like we almost don't fully trust that things are going to happen if we're not the ones leading it. And sometimes Scorpios can almost be, it's like strange with Scorpio placements, because we can be really comfortable and competent in crisis, and anything that has like a crisis or an opening is our comfort zone, because that's when everything is displayed with more honesty and truth in our society. So crisis can actually be more resonate more with us, because there's so much pretense in our society that when things are cracked open, we're like, finally, like we're all facing it. We're all finally taking the mask off. The biggest irony, though, of Scorpio, now calling myself in, is that Scorpio also really wears a mask. And it really likes having control over who sees what. So it can feel comfortable if you're having the crisis and I'm the one that's helping you through it. But it's going to be really protective and selective of who sees its own mess. And so, again, with Uranus kind of stirring up trouble, I think it's really helpful for Scorpio placements to reflect on, where do you need to take your mask off? Where do you need to kind of strengthen your trust muscle and figure out, again, why, asking yourself those personal questions of like, why do you feel like you can hold other people's truth, but you're hesitant to reveal yours? And that's kind of the, one of the stereotypes of Scorpio that I do find to be true, is that, we can be the question askers and the investigators, but we can be extremely cagey and private when we're asked the same questions. And the funny thing is that all Scorpio wants is intimacy. Like, we're the sign of merging, we're the sign of intimacy, but that's the biggest, oftentimes, block to creating the intimacy we yearn for, is that we mystify ourselves. And so others can't gain access. And we can be so curated and crafty with our vulnerability that it actually makes it really difficult to connect to us. And it's kind of like a Capricorn thing. Like Capricorn and Scorpios are so similar. And I think we sometimes help crack each other open because we can sense in the other there is a similar guard up. It can also go the other way, though, where no one is revealing their cards. And so there's a total impasse. But I do think Scorpios, part of de-shaming intensity is inviting in a process of revealing yourself. Obviously, you are the one that, can evaluate who that's, worthy work, who are the like worthy collaborators to invite into a process of knowing. But I think that we can do this work on our own. Like I think there's a lot of inquiry that we can invite with or without other people's participation, and just reflecting simply on where are the places that I feel afraid to reveal and why. I think I'm a Scorpio rising. Oh, wow. How can we take our masks off for ourselves? That's such a good question. I'm trying to like ground it in something tangible. Um, I like for me, a lot of the masks that I wear are like I have this from my childhood, I have this like carryover assumption that having a need is weak. And I'm not sure where it comes from because it doesn't really come from my family culture, but I have this like deep internal sense that if other people can ask me for a lot of things and I will honor that and I will view it as a strength, but there's some, confusing um equation that I've made where like me having a desire or having a need is embarrassing. And I have this like constant fear that I'm going to find out that I was the one that felt more, that I was the one that was too invested. And so it creates this like bizarre aloofness that I'm usually quite unaware of until I really bring awareness to it. And it's completely self protective. It's not anything like there's a total desire to connect and reveal, but I think I have an unconscious, like, defense mechanism that's really, really, like, strong in me. Um, and it's really embarrassingly small things. Like, it's I wish it were, like, deeper than that, but the Kiese Layman episode of my show really spoke to me because Kiese, is, I think, a decade older than me and was sharing he still really struggles to ask people for basic things, like asking doctors to treat him with decency or, asking friends to show up for certain things. I recently had a birthday and like threw a party and was, kind of like hesitating to ask my closest friends to help me with like certain tasks. And so I think for me, taking the mask off has really required me to go inward and figure out like what is the mask that I wear, which again, I think these are personal because they're situational and have a lot to do with like the stories we inherited from our youth. But I'm trying to give you an example of mine, but like it's really required me to slow down and ask myself, like, what are my patterns? What do they stem from? What are the things that I feel totally comfortable and confident sharing? And what are the things that I notice I'm immediately cagey about? Or like I immediately feel kind of it's interesting we're talking so much about Mercury because one of the things for Scorpio Mercury, and Mercury is in Scorpio right now, is that Mercury in Scorpio is very nonverbal and feels a lot more comfortable with like physical touch as emotional reveal as opposed to declarations or sharing its own deep feelings. Like that's really challenging for Mercury in Cancer, Mercury in Pisces, and Mercury in Scorpio. And these again are water signs that feel fluent in emotional expressions, which can be eye contact, can be physical touch, can be music. They're more indirect forms of communication. And I have my natal Mercury retrograde in Scorpio. So I do have a much more like internal way of expressing myself. And the thing that I've learned about intimacy of all kinds is that uh you have to help translate your inner world to someone, and there's nothing more generous than translating your inner world to someone else so that they can create a connection to you. And so one of my many masks that I've had to kind of grapple with is, yeah, the mask of creating mystery. And Scorpio risings, if that is your rising sign, do this often as self protection at an unconscious level. Is we find protection in the mystery, and it helps us feel safe. But I ask this often of my guests with Scorpio placements is like, at what point does that safety preclude the very thing you're longing for, which is to be known, and to really experience deep love? And again, this does not just have to exist in the romantic realm, it can exist in the realm of friendship, the realm of camaraderie at any level. So I don't know. I'm going to think more about that. These are such brilliant questions. and I'm trying to answer them with total honesty. But yeah, I think the mask question, I used to be for 10 years, I was a youth educator and a poet. I taught poetry, and I often did workshops on masks, and they would always resonate because I think beyond astrology, this kind of notion of wearing multiple masks as a way to navigate is just so human and so relatable. And, a lot of those, speaking about how all this astrology this week is asking us to revisit the past. I think as an adult, it's really powerful to revisit, early childhood with like a compassionate, loving, and accepting lens, and understand that we needed certain masks to survive our environments at an age where we had little to no agency in our lives. And now that we're adults, we can start doing some editing and make some conscious choices about how we want to navigate our relationships. And I think with social media, I always sound like, I always feel like I sound like a boomer when I'm like in social media. But I do feel like social media is another arena of performance. And I think in the United States, like one of my fears for us is that life has become so performative. And it's like everything is about the representation of rather than the direct experience of. And so masks have never been more, and avatars and handles and like holograms have never been more salient than now. And so I think it's like, I love drag and I love concepts of like strategic masking. And I think masks can reveal even more truth. So I'm open for all of that conversation. But I think for me, one of my biggest, investigations of myself, and I think I invite all of us into this investigation because I think it's so important, is where do we create the obstacle to a flourishing, thriving life? And how can we begin to look at that and feel agency over creating the change that we want so that we can create the life that we want? And my favorite thing about being a Scorpio is that Scorpios love nothing more than complete honesty. We are the sign that like falls out of love if there's too much pretending. We're the sign that like that's our biggest turnoff if it's like a false forced compliment, or false praise or performative connection or performative forced intimacy. Like that is our biggest ick. And I love that. I love that Scorpio is a sign that is really, really committed to accepting the fullness of life, which includes death. And that is, kind of a full circle of what I was thinking about with the profundity of this moon, which is that there is something about loss that also liberates. And there is also something about loss that is baked into love. The minute we choose to love someone, we also start grieving them, right? And those two things go hand in hand. I'm like trying to catch up with the chat. Are you all laughing at how I was like looking at an old live, and I do wear glasses, but I don't always like wearing them and I don't wear them on my lives. And so then when I'm looking at the chat, I have to be like, I feel that on a cellular level, my desired. I think I'm Scorpio rising. How can we take our masks off? My Jupiter is in Scorpio in the fifth house. Yes, we'll talk about the fifth house. Oh, someone asked how I'm doing today. Wonderful. That scares me since my fifth house is the house of children, creative projects, sex, and pleasure. That's a lot to cover and definitely feel afraid of many masks. I can agree as an older daughter, it's in the family. And there's a peace and comfort in not knowing. Yes. Everyone to have a show pic. Oh my God, that's so funny. I know. I need to have my glasses nearby, and I normally do, but I don't tonight. So I'm like, but it creates intimacy. I'm like close to you. This is such a beautiful conversation, and I really wish we were all. I want to do like more in-person meetups. I know people do that where they like put their location, and I feel so excited about meeting all of you one day. But this is a really good example. So Uranus also governs technology, and I think a lot about how technology has been this like connective medium my entire life as someone who's always loved technology. I'm a Mars and Aquarius. And it's so beautiful to be connected across geography and to feel like we can offer each other so much, even though we're not in the same space. So I also think that I feel really grateful for Uranus today because it brings us all together to reflect and share. And I do think the peacefulness and the comfort that comes from embracing mystery is also very scorpionic. And I was thinking about that today. I spent a lot of today meditating and journaling, and Mercury always wants us to journal. And I really invite everyone as we inch closer to 1047 to, work with the new moon. I really believe in it. I really think it's powerful. And everyone likes to do different things, like whether it's a ritual. I think it's really great to ground in gratitude. And again, this is an interesting new moon in that it's less about seeding these kind of pure, clean new beginnings, and it's more about editing and refining and experimenting. And because Uranus is one of the main characters, there's like a trickster energy on it. So I think it really is about breakthroughs and making space for breakthroughs. And one of the, like, affirmations I've been, thinking about is, like, not only expecting miracles, but embracing surprises. And every time I've been really stubborn and really wanted certain things to go my way or go a certain way, I try and force myself to think about all the times in my life, which are plentiful, where things did not go my way and instead something else happened. And maybe not immediately or right away, and maybe I didn't even create that correlation in the moment, but through time and perspective, you say, "Oh my goodness." And I was thinking about, like, one of I'm a super, super R&B head, and I love Eric Roberson, and he has, like, a song that's just, like, a love song about how grateful he is for every love that never really came together because he met his, now wife. And I always think about that concept too of, like, being grateful for all of the things that didn't work out because now this thing that is working out is giving you a perspective, and a gratitude for, the will of the divine or the will of the cosmos as this wise intelligence. And I really think about that and meditate on that often in a moment where I feel really stubborn and really, like, owed something by the universe. I don't know if you all relate to that, where you're like, surely it's my time. Surely it's my turn. And then I try and be humbled by the mystery of it all, the mystery of it all. And I think Mercury in retrograde, I'm always trying to find, I know I say this often, not just the humor in it, but the possibility of it all. Like, what if you don't know? What if you have no idea? And that's great. And that's, and you never have. And I really also have been thinking about what it's like to really trust. Trust and allow, those are big words for me, and I feel like I'm a good, shepherd of this astrology because I am in the current sky, we have a Taurus rising with all Scorpio, and that is my chart. And I struggle with trusting, and I struggle with allowing. So I feel like those are guiding, imperatives of this moment. And I do wanna also give you a heads up around what's to come for the rest of the week. So tomorrow we have that Mercury Cazimi. I think it's a really beautiful time to have conversations and to create space for messages to come in. Um, we also have a really beautiful sextile between Uranus and Taurus and Neptune and Pisces. And I think we're going to feel that more on, like, the collective scale. I'm like, I suddenly feel like, yes, there is humility in not knowing what's around the corner. I love that. And then November 21st is a pretty active day because the sun starts to move into Sagittarius. But before it does that, the sun has another loud opposition to Uranus and Taurus. So we go from Mercury directly opposite Uranus and Taurus to the sun. And so Friday is another day, especially for my Scorpio and Taurus risings, where information can come in. Remember also during Mercury retrogrades in general, the reason that the time and truth advice is don't jump to conclusions because you don't have the total complete information or picture. This is another moment where that's going to be true. So it's like there could be, information coming in that you didn't have before that shifts how you relate to the thing. And that's always funny with Mercury retrogrades because, like, you are constantly throughout the month that Mercury is retrograde, you're constantly changing your mind or you're feeling like mixed up in a generalized sense of it could be this or that. And I think just allowing that is always my approach with Mercury retrograde of, like, I am not trying to create conclusions. I am not trying to corner anyone. I'm not trying to corner myself. I am just flowing and allowing myself to change my mind, which is extremely hard for me as someone who is all fixed energy, but it's fun to cosplay as a Gemini. So we have Sun and Scorpio opposite Uranus and Taurus. Channing Nicholas said something funny where it's like sticking your finger into an electric socket and being like electrocuted, which I thought was like a pretty good image for Sun op Uranus. So you might get a little fried on Friday. And then the sun moves into Sag. And so that's a really beautiful thing where the sun is moving out of the kind of obsessive, secretive, shadowy, obsessive. I said obsessive twice because that's on point. Waters of Scorpio into the much more like exploratory, adventurous, wide horizon energy of this mutable fire sign in Sagittarius. And the modality is important because again, the fixed quality of Scorpio is why it's so fixated and obsessive and intense and probing. And then we move into a mutable sign that transitions seasons, that knows how to ride the liminal, that is way more comfortable in the unknown, that knows how to just go with the flow. So that's going to bring in some relief. Sagittarius is a fire sign. It is the philosopher, it's the higher mind, it's the sign of wisdom and travel, it's the philosopher, it's one of the signs of communication. So I think it'll feel like a lightening, like some levity enters the scene. And then we have the beautiful astrology of the weekend where we get Mercury trining Saturn, which is a stabilizing energy, and then Jupiter, which is an expansive energy. And I feel like Saturday is going to be such a good day to have conversations about your week with the people that you love, like your best friends, your co-conspirators, your siblings, whoever makes you feel like you can really just get into the debrief. It's big like debrief energy where there is like a lightness at the end of all of the confusion and all of the conversation and all of the reflection. And here in the Bay Area, we have on Saturday and Sunday this thing called West Coast Craft at Fort Mason, where there's all these vendors and everyone dresses up and looks so cute. And I'm going to be helping one of my best friends, who's a really talented ceramicist, look up Pala Ceramics. And it's just going to be a party. Like I already know, it's going to be all of the friends in one beautiful space. And Mercury rules trade and exchange, and it's a what's it called? Like a oh my god, holiday market. So it's just going to be very Mercury and Jupiterian with like all of the friends and all of the life. And I love Sagittarius following Scorpio in the zodiac because after death, there's more life. After death, there is possibility. After death, there's more adventure. And so I think that's like such a poetic handoff in the zodiac, and it will be happening in the skies this week. And then after that, on Sunday, we have this really supportive sextile between the sun and Pluto and Aquarius, and the sun and Sag and Pluto and Aquarius. So wherever Sag and Aquarius are in your chart, there is going to be this nice, like, kind of harmony or teamwork happening on Sunday. And so I think Saturday and Sunday are just going to feel like, like all of that, today, tomorrow, and Friday are pretty freaky. A lot could happen internally, externally in your world. There could be a lot of conversations that you do or don't want to have, a lot of reflection you do or don't want to have. And then by Saturday and Sunday, there's that sense that it was worthwhile. And there's a settling and there's like a kind of re engagement with life. And I love that. I love that the cosmos is never just cruel and it gives us these pockets of joy and these pockets of connection after a period of going really within. And next week, we have gorgeous astrology. We have a Venus Jupiter moment. We have Mercury going direct. So it's interesting. Like, as I get older, I start to think about how sometimes we're praying or we're manifesting a different time in our life. And then when we get that or we get to that place, we realize all of the things that we took for granted in that other period with like renewed eyes. Like I think about slower months that I've had where all every day I just wish that my life were busier and I'm not really taking advantage of the rest. And then when my life quickens, I'm like, why didn't I take advantage of that rest? And so I think this week, it's not a time to rush or to just survive it. Like, I think why don't we just really invite whatever comes up in the next 3 days, because we know Saturday and Sunday are gonna create this other feeling. And I love that quote by Rainer Rilke, Maria Rilke, in his poem where he's like, "No feeling is final." And that is so true in astrology. Like, no feeling is final, no set of conditions are final. There's no last word. So I think there's something beautiful about presence. And Taurus is the sign of presence, you know. I think Taurus, my Taurus rising is, bestows with me a gift, bestows with me. It's crazy because at one point we were in school and we learned things, and then we're adults and we're like, "I don't remember grammar, y'all." Bestows with me is for sure incorrect. Um, but anyways, my Taurus rising, I think, creates in me, help me out, English teachers in the room. It like I don't know, I have this ability to be present, and I think that presence allows me to really feel into what's available in every moment without mapping anxiety onto that moment and then missing what's available, because that's what presence allows. It allows you to tap into what's uniquely available in each moment with those sets of variables. And it's really important to be prepared and then let go. If you're constantly vigilant and anxious, you override the beauty of being connected to what is and the ever vanishing horizon. And I think that's something that I really cherish about Taurus astrology is like it's really inviting us into what's available and asking us to let go of our agendas and our motivations. And I think that that's so important right now is like, what are the moments, even the minutes, the brief minutes in your day where you invite presence and you hold it really sacred? And in those moments of presence, what surfaces? And I think that, that's one of the really beautiful parts of this astrology this week. Okay, more questions. Graciously return to de-shaming emotional intensity. How can we remain steadfast during these days that we are in? It's a watery season, more feelings and less overthinking. Absolutely. Wonderful. And if we graciously return to the de-shaming emotional intensity, how can we remain steadfast? Well, I love that question because I do think that's one of the I went through this like love letter to Scorpio last week around this, where I do feel like Scorpio is such important energy in these times because it is fixed. It's like Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Leo are the sustainer signs. They do know how to remain steadfast in moments that are accelerating all around us, intensifying. And that is exactly why we need to de-shame our intensity, because it's so necessary in these times where we need to be able to pierce through so much propaganda and get to the truth. And no one does that better than Scorpio. And so I think there is like a real, like yesterday too, my best friend is Scorpio moon, and I was just falling in love with her intensity. Like she started her talk with this really powerful prayer. And I was like, yeah, man, this is Scorpio. Like when we're really believing and channeling our intensity, everyone gets really magnetized to that flame. And I was writing about it when I got home that like Scorpio is a flame. We're intense, and that warmth can generate light for so many who encounter it. And especially when we nurture that flame and we believe in it. Pluto and Mars is really about that inner warrior. And I think like the beautiful expression of Scorpio is like, I believe in the power of the people. I believe in the power we can self generate. I believe in, you know, not turning away from intensity of feeling. And it's so interesting when I see a Scorpio in their power and using, and by in their power, I mean really believing that emotion is powerful and connective. And it's almost like I saw in her a lack of self-consciousness around what each and every human desires right now, which is that leadership, that emotional leadership. And she really just like unself-consciously took up the space. And there was something that, and she's also a Leo rising, so there's like that leadership quality baked into her. But I think that the most generous thing we can do is take up our roles really seriously. And Scorpio does that so beautifully, like when we do something, we really do it. And I love that about us. Like we take life very seriously. And then Sagittarius comes to remind us of the power of a laugh. Scorpios are also deeply funny, but Sagittarius follows us in the zodiac to be like, remember that laughter is also medicine. I don't know if this is the right video to ask, but what do you recommend for people who are new to astrology and want to learn? Oh, I love that question. I started with Demetra George's Ancient Astrology, which is such a beautiful book because it goes into the history, the astronomy, and it's kind of chronological. And there's workbook. There's like like there's homework at the end of every section. So it tests your retention and comprehension of the concepts. So if you struggle to answer her questions, then you stay on that chapter and you kind of don't go faster than your comprehension. So that's called Ancient Astrology. Um, You Were Born for This is a really great primer by Chani Nicholas, and that goes through your what an ascendant is, your sun, your moon, and then the condition of each of those planets. So that's kind of a nice digestible but still pretty rigorous starter. And then I always recommend the Astrology podcast, which is led by the most incredible astrologer, Chris Brennan, and generously provides just incredible tutorials and videos on the houses, on the signs. Anything you'd want to know is on the Astrology Podcast YouTube, and it's all free. And I love that. I just think it's incredible that he's provided so many free resources for astrologers to really learn the craft and to learn it at such an advanced level. So those would be my three recommendations: Ancient Astrology, You Were Born for This, and the Astrology Podcast. And then if you're really nerdy and you want to learn some other stuff, I'm just a huge nerd fan of Richard Tarnas, and he has a book, Cosmos and Psyche, and it's just such a comprehensive history of astrology, astronomy, and the outer planets. And he studies transits and how they map onto major cultural shifts. So that would be my last recommendation to round it out. But yeah, I'm sure. And also for people who are listening to the recorded version of this, please leave a comment about any resources that you would offer up for someone who wants to start on their journey. There's also really great apps, like the Chani Nicholas app is really great. There's really time passages. CoStar, I'm much less of a fan of, but I think apps can also be a fun way to engage. A lot of my clients use Chani's app because it helps them kind of get a primer of the vocabulary in the system, and so they can start to kind of self teach. What else do we have? Ancient Astrology, You Were Born for This. Oh, thank you for writing in the chat. Look at this, you guys. This has been one of my favorites. It makes it so much more exciting for me when you all are engaging and participating. And, so much of the work that I do now is just like me. It's so intimate that I really want to be part of a community and learn from each other. And yes, thank you, Noor. Listen to Stars and Stars with Issa. That is my show. A new episode comes out every Tuesday. We are a YouTube show now. So you can hear us and listen to us on all podcast platforms, but we really want you to watch the show on YouTube and subscribe and comment. And it's really, this show is like it's a conversation starter. And I think because astrology is something that we all can share in, it's also really exciting to hear how you all respond and if some of the conversations resonate with your chart or the charts of people you love. And this week we have Tourmaline, an incredible filmmaker and activist, and we talk a lot about their book on Marsha P. Johnson. So there's just so much wisdom that I glean from every episode that also feels very timely with the astrology always. We are going to be doing some rebroads from season 1. So if you are new to the show I'm excited for people to listen to some of my favorite episodes from season 1, and then we have some really incredible conversations after that. So, next week, I probably won't be doing one of these because it's the holidays, but it's been such a pleasure to be with you all, and I wanna log off so that you all can spend some time between now and 10:47 in a few hours with yourselves and your feelings. And we're not overthinking. We're going to um, listen to our feelings and we're going to honor them. And if you want to take a bath or if you want to pull cards or you want to just journal, remember it's Mercury. So it's really great to say some affirmations and write and process. We're not overthinking, but we're spell casting. Remember, Mercury, we cast spells through language. And as a poet, I really believe that language is a technology of possibility, and we can create new worlds by conjuring them through our words. And our words are medicine. And so we bring awareness and clarity and consciousness into our language, and we cast out our spells for a more loving world in which we can all thrive. And I love all of you. It's been such a pleasure to spend my new moon with you. And for all of those who are watching the recording, please leave some affirmations and stories and anecdotes from how this astrology has um, expressed itself in your life. And oh, thank you so much. Yes, this was wonderful. And yeah, I'm wishing you all the best. And I'll tune. We will all reunite either next Wednesday or the Wednesday after. Thank you. Oh, you guys, I love this so much. Peace out. Yeah, go pull cards, Natty. Bye, everybody.